They laughed before I even finished my sentence, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a room full of grown adults could decide who you are in under 3 seconds. I had just walked into that glass conference room carrying a cheap notebook, wearing a jacket that was 2 years old, and the guy at the head of the table leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "So, you're the consultant." Like it was a joke he'd already decided the punchline to. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a meeting. It was a test, and everyone in that room had already failed me. You know what I mean? Let me rewind a bit because this didn't start there. It started years earlier, back when being overlooked wasn't an exception in my life, it was the default setting. I grew up in a place where people learned to size you up fast, and once they did, they never bothered to look again. My clothes were always a season behind my accent, never quite fit the room, and no matter how prepared I was, there was always someone willing to explain things to me slowly, like I was doing my best just to keep up. Teachers, bosses, clients, it didn't matter. They saw what they wanted to see, and then they treated me accordingly. I learned early how to swallow it. Smile, nod, let them think they were right. Because fighting every assumption is exhausting, and when you're just trying to survive, you pick your battles carefully. I took jobs no one wanted. Stayed late when no one asked, and listened when people talked over me like my silence was agreement. Inside, though, something was building. Not anger exactly, more like pressure. The kind that doesn't explode right away but sits there waiting for the wrong moment to be ignored again. The man who laughed at me in that conference room was named Victor Hale, or at least that's what his card said. He ran operations for a mid-sized firm that liked to call itself cutting edge while recycling the same ideas from 10 years ago. I'd been brought in to audit their systems after a costly failure they didn't want to admit was their fault. On paper, I was the expert. In reality, to them, I was just another expense they didn't respect. Victor glanced at my notebook, then at my shoes, then back at my face. We were expecting someone more senior, he said, dragging the word out like it tasted funny. A few people chuckled. Someone else avoided eye contact. I felt that familiar heat crawl up my neck, the one that used to make me shrink. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the years of being underestimated. Maybe it was the fact that I already knew exactly where their problems were coming from. Or maybe I was just tired. "I am senior," I said calmly. "You just don't recognize the packaging." That shut the room up for about 3 seconds. Victor smiled again, tighter this time. "All right," he said. "Let's see what you've got." What I had was everything they'd missed. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I listened. I asked the questions that sounded simple, but landed heavy. By the time we took a break, I had mapped out the weak points in their process, the shortcuts they'd normalized the decisions Victor himself had pushed through despite warnings. I could see it dawning on him slowly, that uncomfortable realization that I wasn't there to be impressed, I was there to expose. Still, the pushback came. It always does. Victor cornered me near the coffee machine and said, "Look, I don't know who vouched for you, but let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." His voice was smooth, friendly, the way people get when they're trying to regain control. "We just need a report that doesn't scare investors." I looked at him and felt something settle into place. "You don't need me to write fiction," I said. "You need me to tell the truth. Those are different services." He laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Careful," he said. "People who make noise don't last long around here." That was the turning point. Not because he threatened me, but because I realized how much power he thought he had and how little he actually understood the situation. I went home that night and didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from clarity. I pulled up old emails reports they'd buried timestamps that told a story no one wanted told. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning accuracy. The final presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon, the kind of slot companies use when they hope bad news will disappear into the weekend. The board filed in polished and distracted. Victor took his seat confidently nodding at people like he'd already won. He didn't look at me. I started slow. Context. Background. No accusations. Just facts. I watched their posture change as patterns emerged, as numbers aligned too neatly to be coincidence. When I showed the first internal warning that had been ignored, Victor shifted. When I showed the second, his jaw tightened. By the third, the room was silent. "Who approved this override?" one board member asked. I didn't answer. I clicked to the next slide. Victor's name filled the screen, time-stamped and undeniable. "That can't be right," Victor said, standing up. "That's out of context." "Then please," I said evenly, "provide the context." He couldn't, because context doesn't help when the truth is complete. Voices overlapped. Questions came fast. I stood there not smiling, not apologizing, just holding the line. This wasn't about humiliating him. It was about correcting a narrative that had cost people their jobs while protecting the ones who caused the damage. When the meeting ended, Victor walked past me without a word. The board asked me to stay. That was when it hit me not like a victory lap, but like a release. The pressure I'd been carrying for years finally had somewhere to go. A week later, I got a call offering me a permanent role. Higher title, more authority, real influence. I thought about it longer than they expected. Because winning doesn't always feel the way movies say it does. Sometimes it feels quiet, complicated, heavy. I accepted on one condition. That transparency wouldn't be optional. They agreed. Victor resigned 2 months later. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew. People started listening to me differently after that. Not because I'd changed, but because the room had. And here's the part that still messes with me. I didn't feel satisfaction watching him leave. I felt relief. Relief that I no longer had to prove I belonged in spaces that never questioned his presence to begin with. I still think about that first laugh sometimes. How small it could have kept me if I'd let it. How easy it would have been to shrink, to stay quiet, to play the role they handed me. But here's the truth no one tells you. Being underestimated is painful, but it's also information. It tells you exactly where people's blind spots are. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been dismissed before you even spoke? Laughed at because you didn't look the part, sound, the part fit the image someone else decided mattered? And when the moment came, did you stay quiet or did you let the truth do the talking? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand and what you would have done if you were in that room with me.